In a stunning turn of events, Dr. George Nichopoulos, a respected physician, found himself at the center of a storm that threatened to upend the accepted narrative of Elvis Presley's death. For years, the medical community and fans alike believed Elvis died of heart disease, with high blood pressure and hardened arteries to blame. But a lawsuit filed by ABC News against Dr. Francisco and District Attorney Hugh S. Stanton aimed to unveil a different story, one that pointed fingers at drug overdose as the true cause of death. The fallout from this lawsuit led to a court order sealing all autopsy records, leaving many questions unanswered. The case took another dramatic turn when Dr. Nichopoulos was called to testify. The goal was clear: to challenge Dr. Jerry Francisco's assertions using Dr. Muirhead, another autopsy expert. However, the path to proving drug overdose wasn't straightforward. Dr. Muirhead's expertise was limited to what he observed during the autopsy, which the court ruled he couldn't discuss in open court due to the sealed records. A creative, albeit controversial, solution was proposed: have Dr. Muirhead testify in private. But this too was blocked by the court, maintaining the seal on all autopsy-related discussions. Despite these hurdles, the board eventually agreed to hear Dr. Francisco's testimony about Elvis's autopsy, which wasn't under seal. Dr. Francisco stuck to his long-held position: Elvis died from cardiac arrhythmia due to high blood pressure and artery blockage, not drugs. Dr. Francisco explained that even if Elvis had taken an overdose of drugs right before his death, the effects wouldn't align with the scene found: no coma, no slow death, and no typical signs of a drug overdose victim. Instead, Elvis's body was stiff and blue, indicators of a rapid death, not a slow one caused by drugs. However, the defense couldn't let Dr. Francisco's testimony stand unchallenged. They introduced a controversial newspaper article that leaked details from the toxicology report, which was not allowed as evidence. Dr. Francisco confirmed the presence of the drugs mentioned, but argued they were part of the diagnosis of heart disease, not the cause of death. The defense then called Dr. Brian Finkel, a toxicologist who analyzed some of Elvis's autopsy samples. Finkel testified that while individual drugs weren't toxic on their own, their combined effects were uncertain, especially for someone with high blood pressure. He stressed that the drug levels weren't high enough to affect Elvis's breathing, crucial for a hypertensive patient. Despite this, the media painted a different picture, focusing on the possibility that Dr. Muirhead's opinion on drug combinations could have changed the outcome. Dr. Nichopoulos watched in dismay as his efforts to clear Elvis's name were overshadowed by sensational media coverage, seemingly more interested in Dr. Muirhead's potential testimony than the facts presented in court. As the trial continued, the state presented portions of a television special, The Elvis Cover-Up, to the board. It was a painful reminder of the battle Dr. Nichopoulos had been fighting to present a balanced view of Elvis's death. The courtroom broadcast left him disheartened, feeling his professional reputation was being destroyed in the public eye. The closing arguments brought a moment of relief, as Dr. Nichopoulos's lawyer, Frank Crawford, highlighted Dr. Nichopoulos's dedication to his patients and his competence as a physician. Crawford argued that while Dr. Nichopoulos made mistakes in record-keeping, his intentions were good and he acted in the best interest of his patients. Prosecutor Frank Scanlon countered by focusing on the charges against Dr. Nichopoulos, emphasizing the state's evidence that prescriptions were excessive and combinations inappropriate. Scanlon urged the board to view the case based on the facts, not the character of the defendant. As the trial proceeded, the stakes remained high. The outcome would not just determine the cause of Elvis Presley's death, but also the integrity of a physician's career dedicated to helping those in need. The battle for the truth about Elvis's final moments raged on, with the world watching closely, eager for answers in a case that promised to be nothing short of sensational. After the dramatic day when the medical board delivered their decision, Dr. Nichopoulos felt a wave of relief wash over him. He had weathered a storm that seemed destined to sink him. The board's verdict was a mixed bag, but the core message was clear. He could continue to practice medicine, albeit with some restrictions. In the days that followed, Dr. Nichopoulos tried to make sense of what had transpired. He thought back to the civil inquiry and the sudden focus on his prescription habits. He had followed the same procedures for 2 years without any complaints. Then suddenly, 2020 TV show intervened and everything changed. The board investigators who had not done their job properly before now zeroed in on him, claiming to uncover vast amounts of dangerous drug combinations. On the morning of January 19, 1980, the Board of Medical Examiners met to discuss the charges against him. The atmosphere was tense. Dr. Foreman, the secretary, spoke first. He suggested a brief suspension to give Dr. Nichopoulos a chance to reflect on his practices. But he also made it clear that the doctor's license would not be revoked. Dr. Nichopoulos breathed a sigh of relief. He was not going to lose his livelihood. Dr. John Burkhart, the board's president, followed. He found Dr. Nichopoulos not guilty on the most serious charges, including gross incompetence, ignorance, and unethical conduct. However, the board did find him guilty of overprescribing certain drugs under specific circumstances. Dr. Nichopoulos had prescribed dangerous doses to some patients over an extended period, particularly mixing upper and downer medications on the same day. The board suggested a more balanced approach, recommending that Dr. Nichopoulos treat each problem separately, perhaps on alternating days. This advice made sense to Dr. Nichopoulos, who had always used Dexedrine to manage Elvis's obesity and downers for his insomnia, which was complicated by sleepwalking. He never had the chance to explain his reasoning fully during the hearing, which focused more on the paperwork than the patient's needs. Dr. Dowling, a representative from Memphis, spoke about the extraordinary circumstances Dr. Nichopoulos faced. He acknowledged the pressure and restraint Dr. Nichopoulos showed in controlling medications. The board ultimately found 10 charges against Dr. Nichopoulos, all related to overprescribing, largely due to poor record keeping. Surprisingly, several other individuals, including entertainers and a gardener, were found guilty of similar charges. The board seemed more concerned with the act of overprescription itself, rather than the outcomes for the patients. Dr. Nichopoulos' case was unique. Some of his patients had shown significant progress, and the board recognized this in their decision. As Dr. Nichopoulos left the courtroom, he felt a mix of emotions. The battle was far from over, but he had won a crucial round. The medical board suspended his license for 3 months and placed him on 3 years of probation. At 52, with 20 years of practice under his belt, this was a significant setback, but not the end of his career. Meanwhile, the state was pursuing criminal charges against Dr. Nichopoulos. The investigation was extensive, more so than any other case they had handled. For Dr. Nichopoulos, it was bewildering. He couldn't understand why the state was focusing on him, especially since the 2020 TV show's claims were tenuous at best. Jewel H. Miller, an executive from the Attorney General's office, explained that the state was acting under a Tennessee law that prohibited prescribing controlled substances in a way that wasn't consistent with legitimate medical practice. In simpler terms, it meant prescribing drugs criminally. The state was not accusing Dr. Nichopoulos of murdering Elvis Presley, despite the intense media coverage suggesting otherwise. The real charge was about his prescription habits, which they deemed illegal. As Dr. Nichopoulos returned to his office, he tried to piece together the chaos of the past months. The road ahead would be challenging, but he was determined to rebuild his practice and restore his reputation. The experience had taught him the importance of meticulous record-keeping and clear communication with both patients and authorities. For now, he would focus on healing both his patients and his own as he navigated the uncertain path forward. Dr. George Nichopoulos found himself in a tough spot. State prosecutors and investigators told reporters they had a solid case against him. They said they interviewed 30 people, looked at reports from 25 other witnesses, checked 124 pharmacies, watched videos from a medical board hearing, and read several books written by Elvis Presley's associates. It seemed their aim was to bring more people forward to say Dr. Nichopoulos was wrong in prescribing medicine to famous musicians like Elvis and Jerry Lee Lewis. What shocked Dr. Nichopoulos was how the state was using his case to send a message. An article by reporter Chisholm revealed that Dr. Nichopoulos' lawyer, Miller, said the initial plan was to look at drug prescriptions by all Memphis doctors. But they focused on Nichopoulos because it was too complex to investigate everyone. Miller assured everyone that most Memphis doctors were cooperative. As the investigation went deeper, it became clear that the real goal wasn't about Elvis or Dr. Nichopoulos. It was about showing that legally prescribed drugs were causing problems. Dr. Nichopoulos suspected the rules about what counted as proper use were flexible. Investigators could choose which doctors' opinions helped their case and ignore others. This made it seem like Dr. Nichopoulos had little chance of proving his innocence. One day, Father Nicholas Viron brought good news. A legal defense fund promised to keep helping with costs. This group, made up of church members and community supporters, eased Dr. Nichopoulos' worry. A local restaurant owner also pledged support, adding more hope to the situation. On May 16, 1980, after posting bail, Dr. Nichopoulos faced charges. He was accused of giving drugs to 11 patients, including the famous musicians, without a good reason. With a bond of just $1,000, he was free but worried about the future. If found guilty, he could face years in prison or big fines. The indictment said Dr. Nichopoulos didn't always act in good faith when prescribing drugs. 2 more charges said he gave drugs to Elvis and Jerry Lee Lewis knowing they were addicts, without trying to help them stop. With his defense fund realizing how serious things were, they decided to hire a top-notch lawyer to help. They wanted someone who could battle the strong case the state was building against Dr. Nichopoulos. The chosen lawyer, James Neal, was famous for big cases like helping convict Jimmy Hoffa and working on Watergate. When James Neal arrived, his presence was impressive. He was confident, kind, and had a calming presence that put everyone at ease. Dr. Nichopoulos took this moment to share his background with James Neal. He spoke about growing up in a family that valued helping others. His father ran a popular cafe where everyone was treated fairly. Despite his mother's limited English, Dr. Nichopoulos learned to care for people deeply, just like his father. He also talked about his love for his sister, highlighting how important she was to him. Through these stories, Dr. Nichopoulos hoped to show James Neal who he really was, a compassionate doctor from a good family, committed to helping people, just like his father taught him. This personal touch was crucial as they prepared to face the big challenge ahead together.